Hi, I'm Stefan, the BMW DIY guy, and I want to show you how to change the plugs on your BMW S55 motor. So that's going to be your M2C, your M3, or your M4. Let's get to it. Okay, so let's talk through the basics here really quickly. Now, everything you need is always listed in the video description below. You're going to have all the tools you need and torque values as you put all this, take it apart and put it back together. So this really isn't that hard, but you just want to make sure that you do it right, because this is some real simple basic maintenance that you can do at home. You can save yourself a pretty good amount of money doing this yourself, but there's a few places where you're going to have to be kind of extra careful as you do it. Also, and I'm going to probably say a couple of times, I bet, make sure you get good plugs. So whether you're getting the BMW plugs, whether you're getting the Bosch plugs, whether you're upgrading to the ngk plugs that a lot of folks do if you tune your car, make sure you get good ones. Now, I will say be really careful with the ngks because there are a lot of fake ones out there on the market. So wherever you get it, make sure it's from a legit dealer and they're the right ones and they're not bad knockoffs. And I'm super serious here. It's really that important. So I'm actually going to be installing the ngks, but this process is the same and it's really not any different. So let's jump into the car. Let's take a look at what we're going to need to do. Okay, so let's start with the basics here first. So first of all, the motor is absolutely stone cold. So I haven't run my car in probably 36 hours at this point. So it is as cold as it's going to be. Make sure you do this when it's cold. Now also, there's a lot of components we're going to have to take off, sadly. Because all of your spark plugs are underneath your charge pipe and a dust cover and a bunch of other components, so we're gonna have to walk through that. So the first thing you wanna do is your upper covers up here. You've got 3 little twist levers. They're 10 millimeter, so you just twist those a quarter turn. There are little plastic rivets on either end that you're gonna lift the center pin of the rivet and take that cover off to expose your carbon fiber strut bar, because that's the next thing we're gonna have to take off. So take all those covers off. Now, also be very careful of your positive battery post over on the other side. Now, you can always unplug your battery if you like. If you don't, put something over the top of your positive post so you make sure you don't hit it with anything, because we're also gonna have to take the big aluminum brace that's underneath all of this off as well. And the last thing you wanna do is touch that positive post. So make sure to either unplug your battery back in your trunk, pull the negative post off, or make sure to cover your positive post over there. Okay, so now that those top covers are off, as you can see, you can take your carbon fiber strut off. Now, I find that on this side, this is loose. The rubber gasketing is just loose, so you can lift it and get it out of the way. This other side here actually has one of those plastic rivets holding it down, but I usually don't actually undo that, because when I undo both bolts, I'll lift this side and slide the whole thing out. So go ahead and take these off. Now, when you take these off, one thing to keep in mind is that the two each in the back are longer, the ones in the front are shorter. So when we put this back on, you're going to want to make sure that you put the shorter ones in front. Now, the one other thing you want to do is you've got a little 10 millimeter bolt right here that holds the reservoir to the strut as well. So go ahead and take that out. Make sure not to drop it. It's a little bolt and it's easy to drop. So take all these out, take your carbon fiber strut out, lift the passenger side, lift it up and slide it out of the rubber grommet on this side and set it aside someplace safe. Okay, so now I need to get to the bolts that actually hold down this large frame that sits here. It runs all the way across the back to the both sides. Now, I've also pulled my engine vanity cover off as well. You just grab it and just lift. That's super simple. But you'll see, and it's going to be the same on both sides, you'll see that there are more of these little plastic rivets here and here that hold down this big cover. Now, because we have to peel this back, we are going to have to undo the plastic rivet that's right here that I normally don't take off. So go ahead and take off both plastic rivets on both sides. Go ahead and pull the plastic rivet here so you can lift this so we can actually get to the bolts that hold this frame down, because we have to pull this frame so we can get the rest of this cover off. Then we're going to be taking the charge pipes off, and the cover's on both sides, and then the charge pipes off. Then we can get the cover off that goes over the top of the coils and the spark plugs. So once you have that off on both sides, which I've also done, quick thing I want to note as well, and you might be able to just barely see on camera, as I said earlier, make sure to be really aware of your positive battery post. So either unhook your ground on the battery in the trunk or cover it. So in this case, I've put a glove over the top of the the positive battery post there, because the last thing I want to do is touch it as I'm lifting either my carbon fiber strut or this frame off, that sort of thing. You want to be really careful. Okay, so these are going to be E12s. So these are reverse torx. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on that side that holds all of this down. So what you're going to want to do is take all 6 of these out. And then I'll have the proper torque values and all the rest of the information for you once we put this all back together. But for now, we're just taking it apart, right? So not too bad. Now the other thing we're going to want to do is, as we get up here towards the center, and I'll shift my camera so you can see, we're also going to have to take out a couple of bolts right here in the center as well. So let me show you those once I adjust my camera, but for now, go ahead and take all 6 of these out and set them aside. So one more quick thing to point out as we lean in here, there was one little 10mm bolt right here that holds the frame for this reservoir on, so you want to take that out as well. And it's on a little hook clip right there, so you can see it's now loose and off. Okay, so up here, up underneath the cover right here, you've got a couple little plastic covers. You can use a plastic trim tool or a flat bladed screwdriver just to pry those covers up. And you're going to see 2 large bolts underneath. So just take that and pry them up. Now, they're also going to be different from the E12s that you had there. So what you're looking at, I believe it's a 14. Nope, I bet you it's a 16. So try this real time. Pretty sure it's a 16, and it is. Okay, so you've got 2 16mm bolts right here at the top. You've got this little cover you can see that lifts up and hinges. So pull out all 6 of the E12s, pull out both of these big E16s right at the top, and then this frame at this point should be loose and you should be able to take it out. Again, caution again about your positive battery post over here. Don't hit it. All right, so this frame is almost free. There's only 2 more bolts that you need to take off, and they're actually E14s of all things. And they're underneath this cover right here. Now, you could potentially kind of pry up on it a little bit to get to it, but I actually prefer to do it right. This piece is held down by 3 more of those little plastic grommets. So if you just take and feed each one of those little grommets up, you should be able to, and you will be able to take off this side trim piece. Now, what you can always do is just leave it in place. It hooks at the far end up there. So just pull all 3 and just lift it up a little bit, because you're going to put it right back into place. Now you can take it off and set it aside if you wanted, but that's going to free up right here, this E14, the last bolt that's holding this into place. Once you get that, lift it up carefully, up and out, and set it aside. Okay, so next up is taking off this back gasket that runs along here, helps seal against your hood. There is a line that fits down into a groove, so you want to make sure not to yard on that really hard. So what you want to do is pull it out, so it disappears right here. Pull it out from that track that it sits in, just like that. And then this whole thing will just come right off. Now, what you've also got is you have 6 10mm bolts that are holding down this cover. 1, 2, 3. This side is a little bit different. 4, 5, 6 right here in front. So you can probably use, you might be able to get a socket in there if you pull this gasket off, but what you can also do is use a 10mm, probably ratcheting wrench to get that 10mm out, and then this whole cover will come off. That will now expose all of the cover on this side. We can take the charge pipes off, and then we can take this dust cover off from the top of our coils. And as far as teardown, we're pretty close to being done once we can get into the coils themselves. All right, so let me freehand the camera here for a second, so hopefully you can see. So as you look at your charge pipe here, you follow it down, okay, behind your manifold hose right here. Right there, you'll see the top. That's an E10 right there, and that's the bolt that holds the bottom of your charge pipe in place. Now, as a quick side note, if you're changing your charge pipes, this might be a nice time to do it as well. You wouldn't have to take all this stuff off to change your charge pipes, but hey, while you're at it, you might as well do it. So you're going to have an E10 bolt like that at the bottom of the charge pipe on both of those. So you want to loosen both of those. Loosen the hose clamp. I think I might have said a second ago the hose clamp closest to the charge cooler. I'm sorry, no. Loosen the hose clamp closest to the charge pipe. So loosen that up so the charge pipe gets loose, and then just gently rock them to get them back out of the coupling. Take them off and set them safely aside. So you don't need to pull your airbox unless you want to. It does give you a little bit more room, but I specifically in this case pulled the airbox on the side so you can see exactly what I'm looking at. I want you to be able to see it. So as you can see, I've got one charge pipe off and the other one is still on. Now the back one you're gonna have to take and use a wobble to get to. And this is where I wanted you to be able to see it. So you can see the bolt is right back here as I put shadow on it. But you can see my extension comes down, comes all the way down right here, and has a wobble to be able to get to that E10 right there. And then just turn your wrench and it'll come off. But really pretty straightforward as long as you can see it. And it's such a hard angle to see. I knew you couldn't see it from above, so I wanted to make sure to show it to you. Now, the one other thing I would recommend while we're here, especially if you've got the airbox off like I do, and you take the airbox simply by taking off the hose clamp right here and then lifting the airbox up and out. It's on a series of little rubber posts right here. So it is something you may want to do if you just want to make this easier. I do try to take out as little as possible, but in this case to show you, and if you want to, you can take your airbox off. So I unplugged the MAF sensor, took the airbox out. You can also see the pipe that's the top of the turbo right here. And what I always do is I'll stuff something lint-free into the top of the turbo right there so you don't get anything that falls into your turbos. So undo both charge pipes, cover the top of your turbos, and then we're gonna pull the cover here next. All right, so let me just freehand the rest here a little bit. And like I said, I've gone ahead and covered the intakes for my turbos. I think that's really important. So when you look at the BMW guides and changing your plugs, they highly recommend blowing out the spark plug wells with compressed air. Now, I say that, and I'm going to emphasize, with your plugs still in place, okay, and to prevent any debris or anything falling into your cylinders. So if you do that, one, you do it before you take your plugs out, and two, you absolutely make sure to cover your turbo intakes. I'm also going to put something into my air intake as well so I don't get any additional dust. So the cover itself is almost loose. There's another one of these little compression posts right here that you just pull up on and pop it free. You've also got this extra cabling here for your MAF sensor that you'll just need to pull it off. So the cable comes out, as you can see on the side. Sorry, off camera angle there for a second. And so you'll just take the cable out, and then this cover is loose, and just feed it out and away, and you'll see the top of your coils. Okay. So really next up on the list, let me set my cover aside, here are all of our coils. The coils are easy. These are just simply lift. You've got these little locking tabs on them that lift up and all the way up, and then the cable that plugs into it can be backed off just like that. Now, knowing me, I'll probably say it a couple of times. I am going to make sure that all of my coils go right back into the same place. So don't just pull them and throw them into a loose pile. Because if I want to track if I'm having any issues, which I'm not, but if I have any issues or anything else like that, I don't want swapping my coils around. I want them to go back into the same position. So when I pull them out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I'm going to put them back in the exact same position. So I'm going to pull these out. I said I've lifted the lock, I've pulled the cable off, just like that, or the plug off, excuse me. You can just get a finger on this and just lift. Now, the one thing I do notice is that sometimes these are really tight, and they can be hard to get off. What you don't want to do is break the lock off. That kind of sucks. But the one thing I'll often do is I'll take an extension, and I don't have one in reach right at the moment. Do you see the hole in it? I'll put an extension through the cover so I can get a better grip on it, and then grip on both sides and gently lift, and there'll be a pop as this thing has vacuum down onto the plugs and pops clean off. Okay, so lift the locks on all 6, pull the plug, and the lock goes all the way up to back the plug off. See, so now the plug is out. So go ahead and do that to all 6. Take all 6 coils off, set them aside in the very certain order, the order that you'll know, so they go back in the same configuration. All right, so let me get the coils off. All right, so all blown off and cleaned off, which is good. Now we're gonna take the plugs out. So what you're gonna wanna use is an extension, a correct thin-walled socket. This is a 14mm thin-walled socket, and you're gonna wanna have it on a wobble. Now, as you can tell, this has a built-in wobble. So I actually got this from Kies Motorsports. You can see with their little brand logo on it. This is great. So I've got a dedicated spark plug removal tool, but you always wanna make sure to use a wobble at the end. Because what you can do is that if you don't have a wobble, it's possible to apply pressure onto the top of the insulation of the plug. Now, when you're taking them out, not that big of a deal, right? But when you're putting them back in, it can be a really big deal, and you can crack the insulation on your plug. So if you look in the video description, I'll have a link for this. So get this or something like it, or use an extension with a wobble and a thin-walled 14mm spark plug socket. So just fit this down in, get it in, and then break it free, just like that. Okay. Now, when you take these out, I'm always super careful when I take these out. And then the other thing I'm going to do, and this should be loose here in just a second, close. Now, the other thing that I'm always going to do is I want to check my plugs just to look for condition. So I'm changing my plugs a little bit early. I'm at just over 19,000 miles on my car, which is early for plugs, right? But I'm changing to the ngks, which are a little bit better, a little bit different. So all in all, plug condition looks really good. And these are the original BMW plugs, you can tell because they have the M logo on them. They're the Bosch plugs with the M logo, so these are the OEM plugs, and I'm willing to bet you they're factory originals. So look at this, it looks pretty healthy, all things considered. But if you're using this video, you can use this as an upgrade, or you can use it to change your plugs because they're due, but I'm actually doing this as an upgrade. So now I'm also going to take all my plugs and set them aside in the same order, so when I get a chance later I can actually take a really close look at them, because this will tell me a little bit more about the health of my car as we go through them. I want to make sure I know which cylinder is which. Okay, so go ahead and take all 6 out, and then we're going to put the new ones in. Okay, so all 6 plugs are out, super easy. So let's talk new plugs here for a second. So obviously I'm putting in the ngks, and they're gapped down to 0.022. Now, there's a million opinions about plugs, what type, what gap. I'm not going to try to solve that debate for you. I couldn't solve that debate if I tried. There's so many people with so many different opinions. There's lots of folks that say that the S55 motor is perfectly fine with OEM plugs at OEM gap, all the way up to like 700 rear wheel horsepower. Maybe so, maybe so. There's a lot of folks as well who will turn around and say if you're going to be at a stage 1 or stage 2 tune, then you absolutely have to be running the ngks, which are 1 step colder or 2 steps colder, depending on what you look at. And it should be gapped to everything from 0.06, so 2.6 to 2.2 to 2.4 to 2.0 to 18, all kinds of different, you name it. Okay, so I'm not going to try to solve that debate for you. So I'm going to go with the ngks that are 1 step colder, and I've gapped them to 0.022, right? So I've got that as a good source of authority from someone I really trust. So that's what I'm going to do in this case, especially when I'm running a stage 2 tune. So gapping your plugs, let me actually grab a plug and I'll show you a brief walkthrough on how to gap your plugs, and then we're going to install the new ones. All right, so let's talk gapping your plugs here for a second. So I have a gapping tool. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. So let me give you some basic pointers of what you shouldn't do. So what you should pretty much never do is jam a screwdriver or something similar in between the contact point on your plug and the electrode bar that comes over the top. You're gonna crack the tip. It's gonna be bad. So what I did was I got a gapping tool, and this is from Kies Motorsports. So while I'm sliding this in here, let's talk about plugs here. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but I'm going to say it again. Be really careful where you get plugs from. Okay, so obviously if you go for the OEM plugs, you can go straight to the dealership, or you can go to some place like FCP Euro or ECS Tuning or Kies Motorsports, and you can get the Bosch plugs or the OEM plugs just fine without any concern. The ngk plugs I'm going to put in, there are a lot of counterfeits out there, so be very careful where you get them. Normally I would say to go to some place like Kies Motorsports, but they're so hard to get that they don't stock them all that often. I find Kies Motorsports is where I get my ngks pretty much most of the time, and I can rely on them being real. So you take a tool like this, you screw the plug into your tool, and then you've got this little pin that will dial down. Okay, then this will press down on the top of that electrode and narrow the gap to the actual contact point itself. Then at that point, what you're going to do is you're going to take a feeler gauge. Now, those little garbage disc ones you get from like the automotive store, don't use those. Get a good set of feeler gauges like this, and it's going to be impossible to see on the camera. But each one of these has a gap on it, so 0.016. So on and so on and so on, 0.024, 0.026, so on. And then what you do is you take the appropriate gap gauge and you slide it into the gap. And then you can feel very gently, now don't crank on it. Again, you don't want to, I'm super meticulous at this stage to be very, very careful because I don't want to crack a plug, okay? So I measure, I slide my little feeler gauge in here, and you know, and then feel it. See if you've got any wiggle. Now, what I'm not doing is I'm not twisting, right? What I'm doing is kind of going up and down to see if I've got any space. And you want your feeler gauge to just barely fit in. And if it doesn't, you know, if it's too big, then very gently just kind of crank down a partial turn, see if it fits in. Now, what I also notice is that this electrode will spring back a little bit. So even though I've cranked it down a little bit, as I relieve pressure, it'll come back up a little bit. See, so now my feeler gauge fits in again and actually has just a tiny little bit of wiggle room in it. So this is a, what, 0.26? So this is one of the OEM plugs, so I don't have to worry about messing with my new ones. My new ones I've gapped down to 0.022, okay? So it's a quick lesson on how to gap your plugs. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put the new plugs in. You never want to use power tools when you do this, like an impact wrench or something similar. Always do them by hand. Put them in very gently on your wobble, your extension of wobble, and put them in and just down to just barely snug. And then we're going to want to use our torque wrench at 23 Newton meters to tighten it down. Okay, so let me get my torque wrench, let me get everything set up, and I'll show you kind of on the first one of what it looks like, and then we'll do all the rest. Okay, so we've got the new plug here into the extension, and it's magnetic, so it helps it stay in. But let me just emphasize, it's really important you don't drop these. You can break the kind of that porcelain insulation on it. Whatever you do, don't drop them. Okay, and don't be too rough when you put them into the cylinder. Okay, these don't have those crush rings on it. These ngks have these copper washers on it. You also put them in dry. You do not do any anti-seize or anything similar. Okay, so put them in dry. So very carefully slide them back into place. Okay, and then adjust my wrench. Again, with that wobble and that thin-walled socket, you're just gonna gently get it back into place. Now, obviously, you don't have a specific order when you're putting these back in because they're new plugs, right? So you've got 6 of these of your plugs, whether they're the Bosch, whether the OEM, and the Bosch and the OEMs are the same plugs. But one's just branded and one isn't, okay? So you just work these into place. You can hear it tightening down. They're always a little squeaky. There it is, bang, just like that. So now it's tight, instantaneously it's tight. Now, the other thing I'm gonna do is I've got my torque wrench. I invested and got a good digital torque wrench that's already preset to 23 Newton meters. Okay, so I'm just going to take this and get this into place, just like that. My torque wrench turned off, so let me turn it back on. Confirm it's at 23 Newton meters, resets to 0, crank it down, 22, 23, just like that, okay? That simple and that gentle, and they're really not in all that tight, but you want to make sure that they're done properly. Okay, so put them in carefully. Do the rest of the 6. Once those are done, we're going to put our coils back on and plug them back in, and I'll show you the coils because they go in a certain angle. There's a little notch here. We're going to make sure to put the coils back in the same order, so if we're tracking and making sure that all of our coils are working properly, we know which ones are where. Okay, so go ahead and do the rest, the remaining 5, and then we'll come back to the coils, and we're putting it all back together now. Okay, so let's get the coils back in. So here's my cylinder number 1 coil. Ooh, I've got a little bit of scringy stuff on that. You get to see that live. Well, I'm going to clean that before I put that back in. I actually picked up a little bit of dirt off that. Okay, well, I definitely don't want that. But if you notice that there's a little notch in the top in the coil itself, and there's a little notch in the space where this goes. So when you put the coil in, and I'm going to clean this before I put it back in, and just line up that notch with the little bracket that's sitting here on the top of the engine itself. Okay, plug the cable in. So the cable only goes in one way, then lock it down, and you're good to go. So I'm going to do all 6 of these, and then we're going to talk through putting the cover back on and putting everything back together. And we're close to done, but I'm going to clean my coil before I put it back in. Okay, so one last check before we cover this back up. So all of our coils are down and solid all the way across. The cables, you know, the plug will slide into place, and this top lever really won't go down unless the plug is all the way on. Okay, though I will say one time changing plugs on a car, I had one of these plugs in cylinder 1 pushed back just a little bit. I'm not entirely sure how, because this locking top cover was down. So just make sure all your plugs are in. They should kind of click a little bit or make a little bit of noise when they go into place. All the top covers are down, and then make sure your coils are pressed all the way down into place, okay? And there's no axles are not sitting up too high or anything like that. Okay, time to put your dust cover back on. Make sure that your grommets are in the right place. A moment ago, I think I talked about the big grommet. That actually stays there. I actually meant the little one right here. So then just take it and just work it back under all this cabling, back past your charge pipes and all of this, just to get it all back into place. So slide this back in and push it down so those grommets go on these posts. Then we're gonna put the cables back on. In this case, we're gonna put the airbox back on. But before the airbox, we'll put our charge pipes in. So let's get this on, let's get our charge pipes on, and we're gonna be putting it all back together. All right, so we're gonna put the back charge pipe on first, which I have here. You can see the little collar where the bolt is going to go in. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually take this and fit it down into place. As I mentioned earlier, if you're gonna change your charge pipes, here's a fantastic time to do it, right? The rear one also has this little grommet post that it goes on as well. So make sure, it's kind of impossible to show it with the airbox intake in place. But just take it and then just work it back, just like as you worked it out. Just work it back down into place. And I always like to do the back one first, because then you can work much more easily to get the bolt in very easily, because you can reach up underneath and get to it from underneath. And if you remember that same underneath view that we had before, so make sure it's fit down into place. You can then hand tighten the bolt in and then work down your extension with the wobble at the end with that E10, okay? So you can also take it and begin to fit it up here in the top. But I find that if you fit it underneath first, it's the best way to go. So I'm gonna reach down underneath, get it fit into place, then make sure it's fit up here at the top. Make sure you haven't lost a hose clamp along the way. I still have my hose clamp here. And we're gonna fit all this back into place. So we're gonna do the back one. We're gonna do the same one for the front, same for the front one, okay? And then we're gonna piece all the rest back together, including, in this case, putting the airbox back on. All right, so charge pipes are back in, the hose clamps are down and tight, the charge pipes are down tight. You've got this wire harness that comes across the top, it's back in its clip. The MAF sensor is back in it, or the MAF sensor cable is back in its clip. If you pulled your airbox like I did, so go ahead and put your airbox back on. That's really easy. All you're gonna do is just take it and rock it back into place. Now, I've got my hose clamp, it's over back behind me, so I'm gonna grab it in just a second, but make sure that your hose clamp is in place, and you wanna just take this and rock it right back down into place as it was before. It sits on a series of those kind of same sort of rubber grommet posts, and I'm gonna work this back down so it's set, and then we can start putting the back pieces back on. So the next piece after this is going to be that tray piece with the 6 bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the one in front, 6. Put that all back in place. Put this back in the track there in that big rubber gasket. Then we're going to put the silver brace back on and so on, but I don't want to get too far ahead. So put your airbags back on, rock it back into place, tighten down the hose clamp, put that back cover back into place with this back in the wire track, and then we'll move to the rest of the bracing. Okay, so now that you have this back in place and you've got this cable through all of this grommet and fit back, or this flange and fit all back in, you can get all of the rubber gasket fit all back into place, tighten down all 6 of those bolts. And as you can see, I've already taken the frame and put it in partially. What you need to do is you need to lift this cover and slide it in underneath. Once it's underneath, you can get it to start to fit into its different spots. Now I was very careful on this side because obviously we have the positive battery post on this side. So I went ahead and left all this rubber piece in the way for right at the moment because I wanted to be very careful as I did this. So the better course of action is probably, like I said, unplugging your battery, okay? But be very careful. I've got a rubber glove over the top of that contact so I didn't touch it at all. Now all this is in place, and you can put all of your reverse torques back in place, okay? So You've got your 216s at the top. You've got, if I remember correctly, an E14 here, E12s, all the way around. So go ahead and just put all those back in snug. Put all of those back in snug, and then I will walk through all of the groups on what their torque values are going to be, because this is a suspension component, I want to make sure it's installed properly. So let me get all the bolts in, then I'll point out torque values on every single one of them. Okay, so it's all secure and down, which is great. So let's just make sure we have our torque value set right. So your E12s are going to be 28 Newton meters. Your E14 is going to be 34. And your big 16 millimeters up here in the top are going to be 56. So make sure to crank all those down to the correct torque values. Just use your torque wrench. Then we're going to get all this rubber gasketing back in place. We're going to get our CF bar back in place, and we're almost done. All right, time to get your CF strut back on. So I'm just going to feed it in on the driver's side, feed it in through the hole, drop it down kind of partially aligned to begin with. Put it down on the passenger side. Again, make sure that your positive battery post is covered. You can get all this rubber grommeting kind of right back into the same place where it's supposed to be. Like that before you bolt it down. All right, so that's all down and good to go, and it's all lined up properly in the front. And again, make sure that this being a suspension component that everything is torqued down properly. All 6 bolts will go down at 28 Newton meters. So the 2 longer ones in each corner in the back, the 2 shorter ones in the front, put them down at 28 Newton meters. And then we're going to put the top covers back on. Make sure you put those caps over those 16 millimeter bolts up in the center. But all in all, we're almost done. All right, with anything like this, especially when we've taken a fair number of components off, let's just give it one quick last walkthrough, right? So obviously I took my airbox off. You may or may not need to do that. But if you do, make sure to check your MAF sensor, make sure that your hose clamp is tight, make sure that your covers are back on with the plastic pins. You've got those quarter turn plastic little lever nuts at the top. Obviously our vanity cover is on with everything clipped underneath it properly. Covers are on both sides. Our CF bar is torqued down. We've got a reservoir bolted on here, and don't forget it had a little bolt right here as well, so the other end of the reservoir right here underneath this cover, right? And so you've got all your plastic little expansion rivets on. Your rain track down this side is set. But all in all, it's done. You shouldn't have any parts left over other than old plugs, and at that point you're pretty much good to go. All right, all done. Time to put your tools away and clean up, and most importantly, start your car. So when you change your plugs, you fire the car up, you want to make sure you don't have any error codes. It starts smoothly, idles smoothly, everything works fine. Maybe take it for a loop around the block. So this is something you can do really easily yourself, and with a few simple tools, and everything you'll need will be listed in the description below. This can save you a lot of money instead of having a shop do it, potentially, because the parts really aren't that expensive, and most of the time to get your plugs changed, it's labor to actually do the work, because there's a fair amount of things that need to come off on the S55 motor. So I hope this gave you the confidence to be able to do the work yourself. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Please make sure to click subscribe and the little alarm bell. It makes a huge difference to my channel. I have a ton of new content coming all the time, plus some really exciting things that are just on the horizon and that I'm really excited to share with you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on my next project.